Okay, so could everyone just change their name to their full name and your branch? Oops. Okay, does that work for everybody? Okay, perfect. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. I know it's like a lot of slides, but I just wanted to have some visuals available. I promise I won't take too long. Okay. So, welcome to the debate workshop. In Masters 5.0, there are 5 tracks. There's the storytelling, world-class discourse, insights into megatrend, debate, and global admissions. Obviously, we're focusing on the debate portion. Um, just a brief overview of the course code is the first 2 letters are obviously the course code. For our instance, it would be D. For storytelling, it would be ST. And then the track is 101 or 102. And then there's also 200 levels and 300 levels. And if there's an M, it usually means that it's meant for a middle school or more advanced class. I don't think that debate really has that, but it's just a note to keep in mind. For debate, it's that the main focus is that students are learning how to engage with each other in debate and discuss the controversies that are in our modern society. Um, we do focus on Asian parliamentary rather than British parliamentary because I think the competitions in Korea are all based on AP debate rather than the British. So it is a little bit different. With model UN classes, it teaches students about the international diplomacy and it also gives them an opportunity to simulate these meetings within their classes. The three, I actually think that 101 is not being taught this semester. So we're only going to go over 102 and 201 and 202. 101 is basically the same as 102. It's just that it's meant or more catered towards a beginner class. So people that have never taken debate before. Oh, no worries. And this new this term is 102E. So it's basically the same as all the previous 102s, like A, B, C, D, except that the exercises and the skill reviews are a little bit different, and the motions. And in the D201 and 202, they're also the same, except that 202 is basically the more advanced version of 201. Like I said, 101, the focus is to evaluate many topics and to basically debate with each other in a professional manner. So keeping all the etiquette in mind within Asian parliamentary. But 102, it's just basically refining their skills a bit further and improving their public speaking skills, as well as their ability to listen to each other and critically think about topics topics. Um, it focuses more on the debate simulation, so the actual practice of debating rather than the skill theory, although you might have a mixed bag of students who are more advanced and more beginner. So really cater towards your class and focus on the skills more if it's obviously more beginner class in your instance. So this is the syllabus for D102E. Like I said before, it's all the same skills. So for example, in lesson 1, it's going to be focusing on arguments and research and brainstorming. So how I always explain arguments to my students, because for some reason they have a lot of difficulties kind of understanding what an argument is that debate is basically a series of arguments, and the motion is your basically your thesis kind of, and your argument is your reason, and then the evidence is your details or your details. So with breaking it down into essay format, they can understand that a little bit more. And the first motion is this house believes that using plus size models in advertisements promotes obesity. You can also change the motion to make it more interesting or fun for students. Sometimes I like to do that too, but I do recommend staying within the debate topic. That way it kind of reduces redundancy and also helps them prepare for any e-learning homework that they have. So the basic class structure is pretty simple. So after the skill lesson, I recommend going through it for around 40 minutes to an hour. So you can go past the first break time. You should start to talk about the debate motion, about the pros and cons, as well before the team matchup, because that way they won't be biased in their answers. Then I would do the team matchup and assign roles. Then they would prepare for around 30 minutes to 40 minutes. And then in the last hour, I would do the debate and adjudication. In lesson 10, I believe, no, in lesson 12, sorry, there's going to be a final project. So the whole class is basically going to be geared towards the final project instead of debate. So within the 102 track, the skills are actually listed in like a little annotation. So sometimes they will start with a review, and then you can show the answers with a link in the smart textbook. Other times they have to do the exercise themselves, and the next page is going to be the answers. So this is for students who are more advanced, and that way they can just kind of do a review of what the certain vocabulary words or concepts meant. It's also a good tool to have for you to understand like where the students are in terms of their progress or their experience in debate. So a little bit more simply put, this depends on my branch, but then after the attendance, for Mokdong anyways, we do a review test. So we use the Hackers book, but you have to ask your branch if you're going to have a vocab test or not, because originally the 102 class did not have a vocab test and only 101 did. And then it's also bi-weekly. There is an iLearning page in the beginning. So it looks something like this. So every odd week is going to be persuasive speaking, and basically they have to use some rhetorical skills or devices and deliver a persuasive speech based on that week's topic. For example, for lesson 1, it's role models. So that kind of ties in with beauty standards, which is why I told you guys to probably stay within the topic, even though if you change the motion. Also, there's other e-learning tasks, such as the first speaker task, second speaker task, clash summary, and the status quo report. So these are all just tools for the students or exercises for the students to practice the roles as well as enhance their skills that will help them in becoming a better debater. And sometimes there's, what I like to do is there's a poll function in the smart textbook, and sometimes I will either think of some alternatives that might be more fun, and then have some like free spaces like E or F, something like that, and then have the students suggest some motions and have just majority votes for that week's motion. Sometimes that helps them be more motivated in doing better. Then I'll just randomly assign them into teams, or if it's the case of like a mix of students that are beginner and more advanced, I would just make sure that there's an equal distribution so that one team isn't just completely demolishing the other team. And or in like the first class, I would split up the roles that so that the more experienced debater can kind of give tips on how to write a speech to the other student. But that's if the class is also like sufficient enough size. During the prep time, just make sure my main goal is to make sure that there's no major holes in the argument and they're staying on task. Usually with master students, they don't really need much like what's called student management. And I would actually move the desks and put them into groups before, like during prep time rather than right before debate, because one, it saves time, and two, it helps them collaborate with each other, because debate is not just individual based, but it is team based. So that helps them kind of bounce ideas off each other and make sure that they don't have the same argument, for example. Then when the debate actually happens, I like to have them stand up, and I have an app. I don't have an app. I use an app called Debate Keeper. It's just a free app on the Play Store, if that's the Galaxy version. So it has like the protected minute and in the first minute and the last minute. And you can also like press POIs and stuff like that, because there are certain rules for POIs, can't exceed 50 seconds. And I would allocate at least 15 to 20 minutes on feedback at the end. Built into the SMART textbook, there's also some exercises that are geared towards just confirming their understanding on that week's lesson. So for example, lesson 1 was arguments, research, and brainstorming. So there's exercises meant for brainstorming, research, and the 5 W's, basically who, what, when, where, why. And I do suggest that you go through these just to help them understand the concept a little bit deeper. Obviously, you can use your own discretion. If your students are extremely well-versed in this skill, then perhaps you can skip this and allocate more time for topic discussions instead. And for the matchups and roles, I do keep track of who did what role for each week. That way that the students can have more experience in all types of roles. So you can use this page on the SMART textbook because they can actually access this page from home, so they can see like what roles they did. What I also like to do is there's a Google Sheets, and for each class, I basically have the weeks, the motion, and their roles and who won. Unfortunately, it looks like the opposition won a lot. I try to kind of balance with like the winning teams too, so not only the government wins or not only the opposition wins, but this just helps me keep track of who did what, and it's also they can keep track. For example, the one student is not going to be continuously the prime minister or continuously the whip. If there's odd numbers, like I mentioned before, you could split up certain roles into 2. So you can do like Prime Minister 1, Prime Minister 2, or Deputy Leader of Opposition 1 and 2. So you can split it up. I usually split the first speaker so that one student can say one argument each. That it's also simpler for the students that way. And when you do the points, you can just do the average points. So 5 divide by 5 rather than divide by 4, so that it's kind of equal, and you're taking into account for the extra person. For other structures for AP, you could also do government versus opposition versus alternative. So you can have 3 teams instead, or you can have 2 governments and 1 opposition. And lastly, you can have teacher team. So sometimes you can be a debater within the debate itself too. Obviously, you need to still give feedback, but I know it can be a little bit daunting, and also it's a lot of work, but it actually can be pretty fun, and it's a good way for students to also see a model response or model speech from a teacher. So you can show them how you can effectively organize your arguments and utilize your presentation skills. So they can kind of mimic that in their next speech. It is also crucial to have a topic discussion before the debate starts or before the matchups, ideally, to provide some more background information and knowledge on the topic. So you can prepare some media cards or YouTube videos if you think that would be beneficial, and make sure to ask leading and discussion questions. For example, like about the three main, what do you call that? Like the stakeholders and like the status quo effects. So like the effects it has on society and things like that. So like, why do you think this happened? Or what do you think the government is the best way to combat this issue? If you just kind of drop the motion on them and just tell them to go prep on their own, usually the debate will not be very good quality because they are still very young. So they might not have the ability to think a bit deeper about the certain topic. Also, built into the SMART textbook, there are special debate challenges. So 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, they have all these challenges. Obviously, if your class is a very newbie class, then you can probably skip. It's probably better to skip these exercises or these challenges. For example, for lesson 3, you can have a POI debate challenge. They did change this from before. Before, I believe, well, I might be mistaken. Before it was that anyone could ask anybody POIs and you weren't allowed to reject them. But it looks like they changed it to the teacher asks POIs towards the students that they're not allowed to reject. And in 5, we have definition challenge. Basically, when the prime minister defines the motion, the opposition has to challenge that motion and you have to go along with that. This one is the hardest one, I believe. There's an impromptu, post-it, and ethical principles challenge as well. And this is what it looks like in the textbook as well. So it will be like a little hyperlink that you can click. Also, if you think it is beneficial, you can show them previous debate videos. So, for example, these are ones that I found from YTN and from Arirang TV. So,
understanding that value judgment debate, the government team proposes the following.
As you can see, they're very good. This one's high school. I believe there's elementary, middle school, and high school. I would recommend showing them probably the middle school to the high school, just so that they can kind of see like, oh, maybe I can get to that level eventually in the future. Oops, that was a mistake. Also, there are some supplementary materials on the FTP. The ID is branch and the password changes periodically, but you can just access it on your computer by just clicking through to the debate portion, obviously here. And on the FTP, there are the segment guide. So it's basically an overview over the course. The rules. So basically a summary of all the different rules. The speech transitions that will help them in structuring their speech, as well as using the proper terminology when they are debating. And there's an adjudication form. So you can use this if you like, but sometimes I don't. I just like to use my computer. For example, I like to use Google Docs, and then I will basically make a chart with 4 columns. So the first is government, the third is opposition, and I would write the arguments and reasons underneath the first column, and then in the next column I would write their time, matter, manner, and method. And you could change this depending on your preferences. For example, matter is if basically the strength and coherence of their arguments. So does their arguments make sense, and do they have sufficient enough justification? Their manner is basically their presentation skills. So are they speaking monotonously, or are they speaking in a very engaging and persuasive manner? And method is their structure. So are they using the correct transitions? Are they making sure that there's no overlap between other teams? So sometimes you can divide this into 40, 40, and 20, but the previous document, it does rate the whole debate out of 40. So for example, manner would be out of 5, method would be out of 5, and the rest 30 would be, oh sorry, 20 would be under matter, or 30, sorry. And there are some questions that you can ask yourself to while you're giving feedback. For example, why did the winning team win? What did they do well, or could they improve? And what could the losing team have done to win next time? But I think the feedback is the most important part of the debate, because without the feedback, first, they're not going to be motivated to do well. And second of all, they're not going to have the correct knowledge to improve over the course. Because each teacher obviously looks for different things from their students. Also, I would recommend giving individual feedback as well as team feedback. So as a team or as a whole, were they able to deliver their arguments in a very strong way? For the final project, what do you mean by be honest in their
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. My mic wasn't working earlier. That was my problem. I noticed that I was listening to what you said about the final part after the debate being feedback on how the other, sort of strengths, weaknesses, what the other did. I've noticed that in general, whether it's something like Giga, something like a lower level class, all the way up to the master's levels class we're talking about, kids have a tendency not to be forthright about these things. So how much weight should we put on the feedback when we know that that's the tendency?
So for the feedback, the teacher is providing this. Majority of feedback should be on the instructor.
From the instructor.
For peer-to-peer feedback, I do think that generally they are honest. What I always do is I ask them, for example, if they said their presentation skills were very good, then I would say, okay, what specifically? So that way they can't just give me just like a politically correct answer, because sometimes they'll feel bad, obviously, to criticize. But usually they do criticize their classmates pretty well, but depends on the class.
Right, but I think in that instance, I also misunderstood where the feedback was coming from. You meant the instructor feedback in that case.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, the instructor feedback at the end is the most important, but I would also ask like the students to rate themselves or rate each other as well.
Okay.
Okay, so for the final project, they changed this from term to term as well. For this time, it's yay or nay debate. It's essentially making a prime minister's speech on a topic of their choosing. And in lesson 12, they will deliver their speech to the class. So the timeline of this can be changed. Sometimes I like to work on this for longer, or I would make the final project on the last day, for example. Depends on the class and their schedule as well. So after they deliver their prime minister's speech, the person speaking will randomly choose another person that has to basically rebut whatever they said. And if this is not if you don't think it's gonna work for you, then you could just use the random wheel, obviously. That way it can also make things a bit faster if they're having trouble finding somebody to be the scapegoat.
Would that work better in smaller groups anyway?
Sorry?
Would that work better in smaller groups anyway?
For smaller groups, I don't think it would matter too much, because there's only, like, for example, like 4 students, then you're narrowed down to 3 students.
Yeah, right.
For a big class, I think that it would be a bigger issue.
Okay.
Yeah, there's like 16 of them, and they're like, oh, which one do I choose? Do I choose my friend, or do I choose the one I hate? So after the chosen one is chosen, you have to basically rebut everything, and this forces the whole class to take notes on who was presenting, although this is very annoying for the students. Sometimes I also like to print out paper or document for the students so that they can provide their feedback. This also kind of gives it a more official feel, in my opinion, because sometimes like they don't try as hard as they could on their final projects. So what I would include in the document would be things like feedback, so the pros and the cons, as well as their notes on their speech. So after the rebutter and the prime minister have spoken, the class has to vote who has won the debate, yay for the original and nay for the response. So the schedule is basically going to look like 10, you choose a topic, 11, you give feedback on their hopefully completed speech. In a perfect world, everyone would have their drafts completed and ready for feedback, but that doesn't always work. Sometimes I like to use a Google Classrooms just so that I can keep things organized. And lesson 12, you will be holding the yay or nay debates. For C learning grades, there are a few components that are graded. It's a lot, but it's pretty straightforward. For example, for participation, are they engaged in the class discussions and are they participating well, essentially. Their arguments, language, their persuasive skills, and their research, as well as note-taking and presentation skills. And obviously the grade ranges are A+ to C. For the Model UN class, the whole now I'm moving on to the Model UN class. If you have any questions about the D102, then you can also ask me at the end. For Model UN class, their main objective is to learn about the functions of the UN and to conduct these simulations in class. Also, they are doing lots of research as well as writing papers throughout the class, and it's to improve their logical reasoning and problem solving through these presentations and debates. So what they'll be covering in the class is researching and creating a country profile, so all the members of the UN, as well as writing position and resolution papers. So this is the syllabus for the 201. So as you can see, the first class is the introduction to UN and Model UN. And their simulation is going to be writing an opening speech. And their topic is human rights protection of vulnerable groups. And you can see that in lessons 10 to 12, they also have a final simulation. And in lesson 13, they have a crisis simulation. So the class structure looks something like this. So the foundation, you can kind of just assume it's laying the foundation down for the skills of that lesson or for the topic of that lesson. And then they will prepare just like in the previous class on their own or with their groups. And then in the last hour, they will do the simulation. So for week one's opening speech, it's introducing whatever country it is that they chose, view on the agenda and policies, proposed solutions to this problem, and make sure that they don't have any interruptions and they're using formal language, as well as they are speaking in an objective way for the point of view of the respected countries. So they're not allowing their personal judgments to seep into their arguments. Lessons 2, 3, and 4 also has a reflect page, which is basically a little bit of a review for the students' understanding of the previous skills learned. And in lessons 6 to 8 and 10 to 12, it would look something like this. So obviously there's no actual skills. It's basically all preparation and simulation. And so with this class structure, it is very important to also focus on the feedback as well. For D201, there are 2 weekly iLearning components. The first one is a research report that relates to their in-class simulation topics. So they have to research the history and the events related to the agenda and write a report basically explaining what the agenda is about. It's similar to their position paper that they'll be writing, and the objective of this task is to improve their research skills and to build their background knowledge about the topic. The second week component is the opening speech. Their acting as a delegate from the UN member state, and they can choose any country to represent. And it's similar to the opening speech taught in lesson 1. So the agenda and the topic of the research report and the opening speech are the same. So they should do the research report before the opening speech. And this also helps them identifying the different involved countries. The objective of this task is to enhance their speaking and presentation skills. The simulations are a lot more interesting when there's a more diverse range of countries that are represented. So it's not just all, for example, European countries. So sometimes the class is very small. It's best for them to work individually so that there's a more diverse array of countries that are represented. If it's larger, you can put them into pairs to represent a country. This can make it a bit more fun for the students and also saves you guys time. Also, depending on the rules of the branch, multiple Model UN classes can be combined to do simulations together. But if you do decide to do this, then make sure you talk with that class's teacher beforehand so that first of all, you guys are following, covering the same topic. And second of all, that the students are not representing the same country so that there's a duplicate of the country. It's also is more fun in my opinion, just like because it makes it a bit more fresh. But like I mentioned before, just check with your branch. With country selection, they are free to represent any country in the UN as long as there's no overlap. So you can give them a list of countries in the UN that really have a definite involvement in the specific agenda. Will make it a bit simpler for them. And in that list, make sure that in that list, as well as in class, make sure that there is a diversity of countries with many opposing viewpoints. That way there can actually be a debate rather than everyone believing in one specific solution.
Oh, Yelina, may I, I taught a version of this class during the summer session, and I felt that, I mean, the students weren't really aware of the world in general, and I felt that I was cheating a little bit by sort of steering them toward certain countries that I knew had real life experience in these issues. Is that permissible?
Of course. So if that will make it simpler for you and for the students, I think that is a very good solution. That way you can also give them more background knowledge about the specific country as well.
Oh, yeah, okay.
In lessons 6 to 8, they will be simulating a UN Security Council meeting, and these members, they change biannually, so every 2 years. So make sure that they're choosing the members of this term rather than the previous terms. Usually in these council meetings, a 2/3 majority is required to pass motions and resolutions, but to simplify things, you can just use a majority vote, so over half. And encourage them to think objectively in the nation's best interest rather than having their personal beliefs cloud their judgment. And you should also keep track of all their work and make sure that they are acting objectively and not just trying to get them grouped with their friends, for example. In D21, there is a big writing portion. So I do recommend that all students should have a Google account. So I would cover this in the first class. I would actually do this for the previous debate class as well, but it's not necessary. For this class, it is like somewhat necessary. So you could actually use also a Google Classroom. It's very simple to set one up if you have a Gmail account, which I assume all of you guys do. So you can just go to like the Google Drive, and if you press the settings, there'll be like classroom, and then you just need to set up the class. So you can like put up announcements there, homework, or just have them submit their papers this way. Or you can just obviously use a simple email. And make sure that when during the simulations, they will need to see each other's papers as well. So you can have them printed out, or you can just use the Google Docs. And if you do choose the Google Docs method, make sure that you're copy and pasting it into a new document and into a view only document so that they can't edit it. For the simulations, there are many. So there's an introductory one in lessons 2 to 4. So it's a meeting between UN Social, Humanitarian, Cultural Committee on Gender Equality and Women's Rights. The second one is from 6 to 8. It's a council simulation between the UN Security Council on nuclear weapons, essentially. And in this simulation, I do recommend that students should work individually so that as many countries are represented as possible. And there are 5 members that are permanent in this meeting. So you have to make sure that these specific countries are also represented. If it's obviously like 4 students, then they have to choose from this list and one will be the sad one out. But the final one is from lesson 10 to 12. It's a meeting between the UN Environmental Community on climate change and impacts. And the last one is just a crisis emergency meeting. So you can make this interesting if you want. For D201, they are basically graded the same as the previous class. So behavior, language skills, thinking capabilities of research, and reasoning, as well as the actual presentation skills that are required. So here you can ask them to self-reflect on the things that they did well or can improve on, as well as asking other friends or peers to give feedback, as well as your own feedback. You should be focusing on their research skills, the MUN procedures, speech quality, and how engaged they are in the debate. So are they just staring into space, or are they actually being an active speaker or active listener? So on the FTP, there are a few supplementary materials that you can review and you can distribute also to the students. It does look hard, but you'll get the hang of it eventually. So this, for example, this one is the sample opening speech. And there's also a sample resolution paper and the materials required for lesson 5. So in lesson 5, the students have to analyze the previous actions of the UN Security Council. So they can choose from preset examples, or they can choose their own topic. The transcripts of the real meeting notes and the draft resolutions are on the FTP, so you can print that. This is an example of one of them. D202 is essentially the same as D201, except it's more in-depth. So they are building their pre-existing Model UN skills. And like the previous class, the objective is to improve research and their ability to write objective papers, as well as their logical reasoning and problem solving through debate. So students must complete D201 prior to D202, so they have to use their existing knowledge to conduct a bit more of an advanced simulation. So here, the students lead the class a bit more than the instructors, so you're kind of just there to make sure nothing crazy happens, I guess. So students simulate the MUN meetings with minimal input from the teacher. There are skill revisions built into the SMART textbook, but the majority of the class time should be spent on research and prep. And iLearning is also the same breakdown as D201. So this is what the syllabus looks like for D202. So in lesson 1, you do a review, and in the rest of them, they go through position papers, opening speeches, and etc. And here are the 3 different committees that they are taking part of. So there's the UN Economic and Social, security, as well as the social, humanitarian, cultural. So for the first 5 lessons, they do have the reflect in starting from lesson 2, as well as like foundation and prep. But in lesson 6 to 13, it's basically all just preparation and simulation. This is just to make sure that they remember all the components that are required in the simulations. So like I mentioned before, it's a review of what was learned in D201 and in the first 5 lessons. And then from lesson 5 to 8, it's the Security Council meeting. The difference between a regular meeting and security meeting is the voting procedure, and the steps of this are outlined very much in detail on the FTP as well as the smart textbook. From lessons 9 to 12 is the final simulation, and lesson 13 is another crisis scenario. The grading is also identical. I did end really quickly, but I do think I kind of wrapped. I really apologized. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask me now. You can also email me the questions. And if before you leave or before you ask questions, I do require some feedback from you. So you can just follow this link. Also, I did make a printout of, like a consolidated document of the debate Bible is what we call it. So it just has all of the materials from the FTP, but put into one document so that it makes your lives easier when you print them. So it just has the transitions, the roles, and basically any, oh, and also like logical fallacies and rhetorical skills and all that good stuff. So sometimes I would just, well, I always print the whole packet out for students and I just distribute it on the first day. Obviously, it's a very new class, then you can kind of hold on to that so you don't scare them away and give it maybe in lesson 3 or 4 instead.
Okay. You've taught this before, obviously. I didn't catch the beginning of the meeting because I was still getting set up. But did you say that you had taught this several times?
Yes. So I've taught basically all the versions of it for the first class.
Because I did in the summer and I was genuinely lost. And one of the things apart from what I mentioned earlier was that I found that once they get behind in something, sort of school subjects and school tests and things get in the way, it's really hard for them to get caught up again. And by the end, I found that I had truncated the whole thing just to tie it up, because some of the kids have been out like a week and it was always a different kid and that sort of thing. What the reason why I asked that question was, if they have all of the syllabus at the very beginning, wouldn't it be easier for them to keep up even in their absence?
Oh yes. So for syllabi, I do always distribute that and on the very first day so that they can keep track of the schedule. So and also so you can include that inside of the debate Bible, or you can just give it out separately.
Right.
Also, if you do choose to use a Google Classroom, I do have a Google Drive version up for them. So they have an electronic and a hard copy.
Okay.
So that if they lose it or if like they can't find it when they're at home, they always have access to it.
Okay.
Also, if they are absent for that meeting for the second class, or yeah, for second and third class, then you can have them send the document to you so that the other students still have access to it.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, I feel that once, especially for middle school students, they are really busy, especially because they have specific time periods where there's lots of tests and things like that. So do try to cater to what is possible for the class and don't try to make them bite off more they can chew. So you can obviously alter the structure a little bit to suit your class's needs a bit more. Also for time management, I forgot to mention, but sometimes you will have difficulties completing the debate on time, especially if it's a very heated debate. So if there's lots of POIs and such. So the reason why I keep the document of of notes and my feedback is that sometimes if there's no time to go in depth, then I will always have that document available. So the beginning of next class, I will go over what they did well and why the winning team won and things like that, and what to improve for today so that they have an idea of how well they did last time.
Yelina, I've got one question I'd like to ask.
Yeah.
So I've been teaching the debate for the last 2 semesters, but I remember when I first did the training for the debates, there was like some kind of website someone brought up with a lot of resources and things available because I've been looking for something about Asian parliamentary debates, and it's like really hard to find other resources, you know? I was wondering if you would know where we could get stuff because, you know, it's a very confusing thing to
It
teach. It's
is.
a lot of moving parts and things like that. So even as teachers, it gets a bit tough. I mean, I've made my own notes that I give to students to try to keep track of everything, but for them to see other like real world resources would be fantastic.
Um, there are there's a huge list of documents on the Google Drive. I'm not sure if it's for your branch. I also have a few resources, but I think that the one that was mentioned was procon.org, I think. And there's also the YTN website where they have like the debate motions that you can like kind of use that were used for like previous tournaments and such like that. But for the actual like skills portion of AP debate or like the background knowledge for that, I think that all you need to do is just read the document that I sent because otherwise it can get really confusing.
Okay.
If you
Right.
want, I can just briefly go over the roles right now because we have like 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh no, I'm pretty good with the
Oh, well,
rules.
now I'm sure now you are if you've
Yeah.
had the time.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to find something more because I'm going to get new students to it next semester and I would like to do it more efficiently because I noticed obviously like they introduce it at really strange speeds during it. Like the 101 won't have any motion challenges, for example. But then my 101 students keep on saying, no, teacher, the motion is bad. The definition challenges. They say, no, the definition is bad. We can't argue this. And I said, oh, well, sorry, you know, we're only doing definition challenges next semester. So stay
No,
tuned for that.
if they know what definition challenges are, then they should totally do it. But
Yeah,
obviously,
no, I get that. No, it's just that's why I'm trying to look for like an overall rundown of things that I can help them with from the beginning.
yeah, so if in that case, like I think that just the document that I sent in this chat, it has literally everything. So it has
Okay.
the roles, it has definition challenges, it has all like the important like vocabulary and terminology, as well as the extra rhetorical skills and stuff. So things like, oh, like what is an anecdote or what is a hyperbole, things like that.
Okay.
So make it
Thank you so
sound
much.
extra smart. Any other questions? No? Okay, so then I think that if you submitted the survey, then you can go. Thank you so much for listening to me rap for an hour.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
Bye bye.